All wings report in. Austin standing by.
Mike, standing by.
Austin, standing by.
The Rogue 3 podcast is locked on target. Whether it's movies, shows, books, comics, or more, we're going to be coming to you from a galaxy far, far away to celebrate all things Star Wars. Hey guys, welcome to the Rogue 3 podcast. We're excited to talk to you today about the first arc of Andor. We're going to be covering not just one episode, we're going to be covering the first 3 episodes. That's going to include episode 1, 1 year later, episode 2, Sagrona Teema, and episode 3, Harvest. We're really excited to jump into it. So what do you guys think? We're going to start off. What do we think of the episode so far?
It's a great jumping off point to jump 1 year later, to give these characters some time to grow kind of in the background. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, it really hit the ground running with episode 1. The first season of Andor really kind of was a slow build to the really big conclusion at the end of the 3rd episode. But this episode just really just launched right into action. And I thought that was a really fun juxtaposition.
I also love that it puts us right in the timeline of when Star Wars Rebels starts as well. So those are kind of paralleling each other during this timeline of Rebels is going on, but also Andor is going on. So this rebellion is growing in a couple different ways.
It's interesting to compare the first season of Rebels, which is what would be happening right now, with this arc of Andor. The tones are so different. And I know one is for one audience and one is for another audience. But it's fascinating, the lighthearted tone of one Rebel cell versus the more aggressive, dark tones that you'll find in Andor's. I don't know if you call it Estelle that he's in. We really don't know too much about what his rebel group is doing. It's kind of interesting. So overall, did we love the first arc?
Yeah, I loved it. I don't think there's been any drop in quality from the excellent first season. I think they really hit the ground running, and we're setting up for some phenomenal weeks of very depressing television.
I love it. I want to rip my heart out. I hope it kills me. And honestly, the end of this ride would kill me.
I also love the structure of it, giving us 3 episodes, 50 minutes long. It's like getting a movie each week. And it mostly a self-contained story since it's a whole arc of the show. So it really feels satisfying to be able to watch them all quick right together. I know it's kind of a different way. Star Wars has never done it that way before. And so I really like that format for the show.
Well, and it was really, that was a complaint a lot of people had in the first season was it was structured this way, but spread out week to week. And a lot of people felt like it was really slow. You'd have 2 episodes of slow build up and then the dramatic conclusion. And so I think they're trying to kind of negate those complaints. And I certainly enjoy getting to watch all 3 at once. So it's going to be a bummer that it's going to be over so much faster.
And you mentioned that it's kind of like a movie, and that's actually how we're going to break this episode down. We're not going to be analyzing this episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. We're going to be breaking this down in these different story parts. It was actually really fun to get to oscillate between the 4 different storylines. We're categorizing it as 4 different storylines. Whereas when you got tired of one, it was nice to move on to another, and the pacing really worked between the 4 storylines, and I really think that thematically it worked well as well. We're going to dive into that a little bit later. So just to recap, the 4 storylines we're referring to, of course, is Cassian's storyline on Sinar and on Yavin. We'll dive into that a little bit later. The group of Ferrix survivors on Mina Rao, Dedra and Cyril, and then finally the just glorious Mon Mothma and Luthen arc, which is I don't know about you guys, but that's my favorite arc. I'm very excited to talk about that one.
Yeah, do we want to start off with Cassian? He starts off the show, and I would say, compared to how people felt about the first season, and it starts slow, the opening of this episode and his storyline was anything but slow. It was intense from start. I loved seeing him on Sinar, a new planet for us. We've known about Sinar as the group, the organization, the company that builds TIE fighters throughout I think forever, from Lucasfilm, basically. And so it was cool to see, to see this actually be a planet and get that actual canon connection in live action.
It's interesting that it's the name of a planet. It's Sinar Systems as like an organization or a company. So it's kind of fun to see that they've named a planet after themselves. It makes you wonder if maybe there's a story there. Who I don't know exactly who Sinar is named after, if it's a family or a person, or if maybe it was named after the planet. I'm not quite sure. I think it'd be interesting if Sinar was actually something that they renamed that planet because they took production there. It could be fascinating. So it was cool to get our first on-screen appearance of the planet Sinar. We see a very different Cassian than who we're going to see in Rogue One.
I actually feel like this is like we're getting kind of a bit of a bridge to like a big jump from first season Cassian that was very like pessimistic, out for himself, and like we are now like the Cassian's very bought into the mission, like bought into the rebellion. And yeah, he definitely, you're right, it's definitely juxtaposition because you don't remember at the beginning of Rogue One, he's meeting with that one spy and like shoots them to get away from the Empire and everything. But he's giving this new young Imperial defector Nia, he's like giving her like a pep talk, and like yeah, it's not like one of the big speeches that like Marva and Luthen gave last season, but it's like a like little encapsulation of what being in the rebellion's like.
Absolutely. She's coming home.
In some ways, I thought his little pep talk to Nia was very similar kind of to how Luthen was talking to him in the first season, kind of trying to bring him into the fold and get what he needed. And I honestly, I expected her to die. I expected her to get shot by him or someone else, but we're wondering if she'll be back or we'll see her somewhere else because dead doesn't always mean dead. So not seeing anything means maybe she could come back in some other way.
But it really works. I think it really works to get us to buy Cassian as the protagonist of this show. Like it really gets you to buy in with him a lot easier than in season one, where he's just like making a lot of like selfish decisions, which we all know is in service of like the greater narrative. But this season, he's like, "Oh, this is our hero. We're behind going forward in the show."
It was interesting. The password that he had to use was Kafrene, which is, of course, a reference to the Ring of Kafrene from the beginning of Rogue One. I'm wondering if that password being Kafrene is going to tie back in later and maybe lead to why he ends up at Kafrene. I don't know if that's going to be a bigger story point or if it's just going to be kind of a fun nod. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that particular instance. But the password was to, of course, a special TIE fighter. It's the TIE Avenger, which previously appeared in the TIE Fighter video game. So it was really exciting to be able to see this on screen. It's really interesting to see, we see it a lot in Rebels as well. These prototype TIE fighters, all these special features that a lot of the regular TIE fighters don't have. We also see, I can't remember, do you guys remember the name of the other ships that we see on Sinar?
It's the TIE Advanced V1. And it's the same ship that see it as timeline wise. We see it in Rebels being flown by Inquisitors. And so we've seen it somewhere else, but this is a good addition to see it again and in live action.
Absolutely. It's so fun to see all these plot points in live action compared to animation. Just makes it feel so much more real. But he doesn't stay on Sinar for long. He ended up on an...
So we can't not talk about his disastrous escape. Like how long it took him to get out of the garage.
Yeah. It very much reminded me of the Umbara arc from Clone Wars when the clones try and fly an Umbaran ship and they crash into things and set off alarms and everything. It was very, very similar. I like seeing that Cassian's not just an expert spy now 1 year later. He's still kind of learning and making some mistakes along the way.
I think it'd be very easy for them to show it as he's now an expert. It's I think a lot of times in Star Wars we see these people jump into a ship and they're just good to go. They know how to fly a ship and we're all set. And ships are very different. It's like if I tried to jump into a car with a stick, I have no idea.
That's a
I'd
good
drive.
parallel.
It'd probably look pretty similar. Um, so it's fun to see that the internals of the ship looked a bit different than I think what we're used to seeing in a Star Wars ship. And it was kind of exciting, to watch him make the
Yeah,
attempt.
it has a lot of room. It's very roomy. It has a lot of space. And there's a couple of things about it that are also different. It has a Navi computer and a hyperdrive, which allows him to go somewhere else, which usually TIE fighters don't have those. So that was kind of an interesting addition to have it be able to go to hyperspace and go somewhere else. Because we've seen that in just the TIE Defenders in Rebels, really. We haven't really seen that in other TIE fighters elsewhere.
All right. Well, let's jump a little bit further into Cassian's arc. In episode 2, he lands on an unknown planet. This is the only planet where they do not tell us where they are. Usually there's a little title card, which of course means that this is probably a pretty important planet.
As we were watching this episode, we actually all clocked that and said, hey, wait, why didn't it say what planet when it said Sinar and it says Mina Rao later? We were wondering, why didn't it tell us? Is this his home planet? Is this somewhere else? And then eventually we learn.
It's of course, we can go ahead and say you guys should have already watched the episode. It's Yavin 4, which is the planet where the rebels make their base during Rogue One and, of course, in A New Hope. So it's really a sign that we're starting to get closer to that time period and we're priming for the main attack on the Death Star. And he meets a group of people here, the Maya Pei Brigade. They, of course, were mentioned. Maya Pei, at least, was mentioned in season 1 by Luthen, I believe, correct?
He's talking with Luthen, but I believe it's Saw Gerrera that actually mentions them or names them.
Okay.
I think. I'd have to double check.
Saw Gerrera. So Saw Gerrera mentions the Maya Pei. And we really see this group of young people who have no organization. They really don't know what they're doing, and they're trying to get off of Yavin. And Cassian is, of course, their only hope through that ship. We do see kind of a parallel back and forth here between the Imperials and the Rebels. The Imperials are very organized. The Maya Pei group is absolutely not organized.
Well, and I think it's important to note that the reason they're so disorganized is their leader disappeared. Cassian was going to meet a guy named Porco that was supposed to be in charge of this group. And I don't know if they say if Porco died or if he's just like gone, but yeah.
Died.
Yeah, they shot him because
that's right.
seemed like an ending.
And because he was gone, these people are leaderless. They have no guide. And so I think a huge theme of this series is going to be the rebels need a leader, which we think that's going to be where Mon Mothma steps in to take that role that we see in Rogue One.
Yeah, we really see the disorganization of the rebel group and that they can't even get along with each other, right? That they split up into two different groups. They start infighting. They shoot the one person that in their group that probably could have learned to pilot the TIE fighter that Andor brought to them, but they can't even get past simple things like one of the leaders, his brother, took their ship and left them, and he thinks they're coming back, but it doesn't seem like that's likely.
And then, of course, we're drifting into episode 2 of Cassian's arc. They're continuing to fight. Not a lot of progress is made, really. And to be honest, not much happens.
Well, so we get to see Cassian like kind of manipulate the group, because the episode 2 starts with the group having formally split into two factions, one of which is in the old ruined ship, and one is which is in the TIE fighter. And Cassian is being held prisoner in the old ruined ship, and Cassian's able to kind of like plant these seeds of doubt to get the rebels distracted so that he can get back to the ship.
He really does display a lot of You said manipulator. I think that's so true of trying to convince people like, oh, you need to set up a perimeter and you need to do that. And it's also showing that he does have more skill, more knowledge than them of how to operate, right? So yeah, he kind of messed up when he was trying to fly the ship there and it crashed and things like that. But he's also clearly more skilled, more knowledgeable than this group right now. And so I think it's a good connection between where he's at in this rebellion and where they're at.
And of course, eventually he does manipulate them enough where he's able to make his way to the TIE fighter and make it off planet. And that's when we discover that he's on Yavin.
And that's when he makes his way to Mina Rao, which kind of takes us to our next storyline.
Yeah, Mina Rao, a new planet for us again. And that's where the Ferric survivors, Brasso, Bix, and Willman are. And they've kind of started a new life there and start working on this planet that seems to be all of it, at least sounds like it's all huge wheat fields. I love seeing new worlds and how different they can be. So it was cool to start to explore this one, even though it's basically just wheat fields.
And when we first come on the planet, we of course see Bix, and she's having a nightmare about the events of season 1. So she's still very much recovering from that. What's nice to see is that the group is sticking together and they're supporting each other, and at least they're not alone. Brasso is there, and he is now seeing this woman named Talia, who we really don't know too much about.
Well, I think it goes to show that they've been there for a minute and that they've kind of ingratiated themselves into the community. You know, we see them like having like the big like meal with the town later. You see B2 emos like playing with the kids, and like they're part of the town now. They've ingratiated themselves into the community. Which I would say is, you know, another one of those interesting parallels between Rebels and Empire. Is, you know, the Empire comes in and just like stomps all over everything and you know, makes everything worse. But the Rebels are like, they become part of the fabric of the community.
Yeah, the Empire never tries to become part of the community, right? They just want to control everything. And I imagine, you know, they brought these Imperials in from away from Mina Rao. But if they had just stationed a couple of people there and they had become part of the community, it would be a lot easier to control, to influence, to be able to do what you want. And I think it goes to the idea of how big trust is, that this group of Ferric survivors builds trust with this community. They work with them. They're helped by them.
That we see the farmer that tries to help them get off planet. Like he gives them the way to get off, and yeah, he wasn't a rebel in like the traditional sense. Like he wasn't, you know, part of Luthen's organization. He was just a guy trying to help people do good, and it's just kind of the power that these people have.
I think it's a good message of, if you treat people well, they'll treat you well. If you treat people like dirt, like the Imperials do, then people are going to fight back against you and not want to be with you and get along with you.
Of course, all of this is kind of foiled by the Imperial supply census starting. They mentioned that this hasn't been something that they've done in a long time, so it's kind of intriguing as to why this is starting now. And we see a group of Imperials that very much does not care for this community at all. We see the one kind of sleazy Imperial is certainly doing his best to take from Bix, which we're going to see by the 3rd episode gets pretty dark.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them come in, and it doesn't seem like a very large group, right? But they're just spreading out. And the one thing that kind of sent chills down my spine is that it seemed like there was no way or reason that they're going about it. They seem to be doing a lot of random checks. And so there's a lot of uncertainty with it. And it's kind of terrifying. You feel the tension for this group of survivors, and they don't know what's going to happen. Like, they could stay and it could be totally fine. They could be caught and killed or deported or something else. They just don't know how this is going to affect them.
It's made pretty clear that the order of operations is dictated because that guy wants to get back to Bix. Like when he sees her on the first day, and she says her husband is off world. She says she has a husband to try to keep him away. But he changes his plan so that he goes there the next day. And it shows just like the arbitrary nature and kind of how evil they are. It's pretty harsh to watch.
I think it's interesting that a big part of what the Imperials are looking for are people who are undocumented on the planet. Um, and it's not just our ferric survivors that are undocumented. There's a large portion of people here who are undocumented and being taken, um, who are critical to the planet's production of, it's wheat, correct? That they're,
They might have a Star Wars name for it, but yeah, it's wheat.
yeah, or whatever it's wheat. It's essentially wheat. Um, and undeniably, we can draw real world parallels within this storyline. This was, of course, filmed long ago, but I think right now we can see this in the real world as well.
Well, we have to talk about the big scenes at the end. So a bit of a trigger warning for anybody, but there's some sexual assault that happens in that episode, and it's pretty brutal to watch. The Imperial inspector comes by the house, and they do a really interesting thing in the first episode. When Bix has her nightmare, she sees her inspector in the mirror in their house, and that's how we see the inspector come into. So you have an interrogator and the inspector both come through the mirror before they get to Biggs, and it's a very brutal fight. And she's thankfully able to keep him off before help can get to her. But while that's happening, Will is flirting with the girl on the farm next door. He wants to talk to her before they leave the planet. And Brasso is I can't remember exactly where Brasso was, but he was working and trying to rush home because he knows the inspectors are coming, and he's intercepted by the Imperials before he can get there. And was a really great scene where the farmer that's helping him get off planet, is being attacked by the inspectors, and Brasso kind of takes one for the team to protect that farmer and make the farmer look innocent. Which just goes to show how great a character Brasso is.
Yeah, I really loved. I had to look up the farmer's named Callan because I thought he was a great character helping them out. But then, yeah, Brasso basically accuses him of turning on them and revealing them and everything. So it looks like Callan's okay to the Empire, at least. We can also talk about the end of that episode when Cassian comes back with the TIE fighter and tries to rescue them. And unfortunately, one of my favorite characters in this first 3 episodes, Brasso, doesn't make it. I thought he did, but the way that they cut it, the way that they edited it, I didn't notice that stormtrooper that's lining up and you see him take that extra moment. I didn't think he fired in time, but then later on you see that yes, he did. And so, unfortunately, Brasso doesn't make it off of it.
And while not a death, another loss is B2 Emo gets left behind. And I don't know.
It was heartbreaking.
It was really sad.
He wanted Cassian so badly, and he has to stay behind. I hope we see more B2.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that's going to... I don't know that we're going to get B2 because it makes me really sad. Cassian.
Cassian. It was such a great droid. It's I mean that's one of the things Star Wars does so well is make you care for droids, for these other creatures and other things, and B2 Emo was a great addition. I hope we see that model droid somewhere else in some other story at some point.
And I guess we know K2SO is coming, and I guess they probably didn't want to have more than one droid going on, but I'm hoping that we get to see a K2 B2 interaction.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
Speaking of K2 as the Imperial droid, do we want to talk about Dedra and Cyril's storyline? We didn't see Cyril too much. He wasn't in the first episode, but we do see Dedra with a big group of Imperials, and of course Orson Krennic, the leader of the Death Star project, comes back with Ben Mendelsohn, which was such a delight to see him return from Rogue One. And they're planning to take over Gorman.
They are. So they're on the Mouthing Divide, I'm not sure if that's the name of a part of a planet or if it's supposed to be the name of like the area in the galaxies. I'm not quite sure. But either way, it's a secret base. It's on beautiful snowy mountains, which is where all evil work happens, of course. And some pretty notable people are mentioned as not being present. Tarkin, Yularen, two important people at the top of the Imperial chain, are not aware of this meeting or the plans on Gorman. They are mentioned to be notified later directly by Palpatine, but as of right now, they're being kept in the dark. The big plan here is what we would call the dream of energy independence, or unlimited power. Um, it's really interesting to see that flashback to earlier pieces in the story. You know, in the Clone Wars, we have the Crystal Crisis on Utapau, where they are looking for a power source, not knowing that it's for the Death Star. Same with Catalyst. Galen Erso thinks that he's working on energy work for the galaxy, and of course, we later find out that that is absolutely not the case. He's working on how to create a weapon. I really, really loved the propaganda video that they put up on Gorman. It was a very like wartime-esque 50s era video showing how amazing Gorman was. And it's really interesting to see. So the Imperials made that propaganda video, and it's really interesting to see how those two gentlemen built it. They talked about how they introduced spiders in the video so that they can eventually show spiders rising up against them as being vicious. They showed a very haughty group of Gormans to make it seem like they're very self-important. Do you guys remember what I think there was a very interesting name for the propagandists?
Ministry of Enlightenment.
Ministry of Enlightenment.
A direct parallel to Nazi Germany.
Eventually, their plan is, of course, to take the resources from Gorman. Dedra, of course, later mentions that propaganda alone is not going to work here. And so I think we're probably going to see some pretty interesting rebel activity later that the Imperials plant there, or at least draw the rebels there to make it so that Gorman is less sympathetic in the eyes of the people.
Well, and I think Dedra is very interesting in these scenes because she doesn't want to be there. She's still focused on her mission from season 1, which is finding Axis, aka Luthen. She feels like she's just so close, and her boss is like, "You have spent so much time on this. Most people would have lost their careers after Ferrix, but like I still see that there's use in you. You've got to take this assignment, and you've got to knock it out of the park." And they're having this conversation about wiping out a planet super casually, like on a coffee break in their meeting. They casually mention oh, we're to do a plague that's a little risky, can you out of hand quickly. And they're having all these talks about how they're going to wipe out these people, and Dedra doesn't even want to do it, and not because of moral reasons, but because she's focused on her mission.
I like that she brings up that propaganda is not going to be enough, that you have to influence something further for it to be a good reason for us to essentially destroy a planet. They say that the mining, that the calcite that they want for this energy project would destabilize the planet, which is a crazy step for them to go from we're going to mine to we're going to destroy a planet. And she has to essentially take a demotion, and she's going to be stepping away from trying to find access to work on this absolutely secret project that she's not allowed to tell anyone what she's working on. I wonder how that will come into play when we see her and Cyril more, if he'll learn about it or if she will not tell him what's going on.
Speaking of Cyril, so we're making our way to episode 2. Well, we delightfully find out that they have started just the most awkward relationship possible, and I gotta be honest, I'm all in for it. I love it. I think it's fun to watch them together. It feels like a very weird but kind of supportive relationship. They're certainly not antagonistic towards each other. I think it's interesting to display a happy couple, well, relatively for Cyril and Dedra. I don't know if they can be happy, but relatively happy couple within the Empire who I'm kind of rooting for, even though they're on the side of evil. I want those kids to make it. And they're, of course, planning for a visit from the star of season 1, Edie, who is Cyril's mother. It's so interesting to watch her come in and tear Cyril apart. It's interesting to see, Dedra come back and tear Edie right back down. They mentioned, do you remember Cyril's uncle's name?
Harlow.
Harlow, Uncle Harlow, and he's this big connection for Edie and Cyril, and Dedra's just like, I looked into him. He's just he is sleazy.
He's a criminal.
Such no good. He's a criminal. And just to see Edie get torn down by that, and Cyril has to leave, and to watch Dedra tear Edie down further and be like, I will make sure he's a part of your life, but you cannot keep tearing him down. And if you do, we're out and you're not going to see us again. And Edie's here for it. Edie backs down and she's much more polite after Cyril.
Oh yeah, this was the first time we've seen Edie like out of her element, which was her apartment. This is the first she in the apartment. She presented herself as this like fancy coruscante woman that's like knows everybody, has all these connections and everything. And she comes in and she's really classless. Like you come into this really stark white apartment. She's wearing this really garish orange outfit. She asked for like a random drink that like nobody would have. And then when she has terrible table manners, like she's just like using utensils every which way. And Dedra was more nervous to meet Edie than she was to like have these conversations about genocide. Like you see her like trying to really nervously decide on her outfit and work on her smile and everything. And Edie sits down and Edie's just like so disrespectful of her son. And Cyril goes and has his like very relatable like meltdown in his bedroom, and Dedra just like puts her in place, and it was really satisfying to watch.
I loved seeing Dedra feel powerful, right? Feel so strong and so able to take command, because with Ferrix, we saw her fall apart. We saw her plans fail and everything. So kind of this is almost a building her back up in our minds of, no, she is actually really strong, really powerful, and knows how to get what she wants out of people. And it was kind of terrifying. I wouldn't want her as a daughter-in-law.
I don't know though, because I would know that my son was being successful. And she was going to take.
We see him in a promotion.
Exactly. I mean, he's successful at his job. He's not overwhelmingly so, but he's doing his job. He's a leader in the company. It's interesting to see him talk to that new recruit where he was just a little bit before, just as awkward, as ever.
It'll be interesting to see if Cyril is on board with everything. He really believes in like the goodness of the Empire and everything. I think it could be interesting if they make it where he learns about what Dedra's doing and he doesn't want to be a part of it.
I'd be interested to see, his progression, because he also is very high on himself, the work he was doing and everything. So I would be interested to see, like, does both his outlook of the Empire and his outlook in like what he's been doing change?
Yeah.
And if those create a parallel.
I think he very much represents the everyman in the Empire. For the most part, people see the Empire as, unless they're being oppressed, but like the people of Coruscant would see the Empire as an important force who's protecting people. They're not being exposed necessarily to the evils. They might say it's a little bit stricter than things in the Republic were, but they see it as a good thing where it's protecting them. In reality, that's maybe not the case. It's going to be interesting to see Cyril hopefully realize that over the next 3 pieces of the season. I would be interested to see him kind of maybe not become a rebel. I don't think he has that in him, but at least realize that the Empire is not what he thought it was.
Yeah. And I think we can talk about the two people that already know that the Empire is not a force for good, is not something to look up towards. It is something to fight against. And that's Mon Mothma and Luthen, that their storylines are completely tied together this first 3 episodes. And I love when Mon Mothma first appears, she's getting ready. There's a party, and we see Chandrila for the first time in live action, and she sees something, and it's kind of terrifying. She's like, oh no, why is that? What's going on there? And we figure out that it's Luthen who's there at the party and is an invited guest from her daughter's future father-in-law, Davos Golden. And I love seeing her reaction to seeing Luthen there. It's out in the open, which is way different for him.
Well, that scene was really cool. How she started up like high up in the castle, and you see her make her way down, and you realize like how massive of a set this was. This is a huge set, and there's a fair amount of storytelling that happens. She interacts with several people on her way down. Notably, Erskine is a character from Rebels. He's a guy that gets her
assistant.
Yeah, he's her assistant in Rebels, and he looks just like him, which is wild. It was phenomenal casting.
Which is funny because his eyes barely show in Rebels. You remember Rebels kind of did a lot of where they wouldn't show the eyes, but that's nice to see.
Yeah, but and she ended up with several other people, kind of like re-emphasized that this was her daughter's wedding, and that's what they were there for. And then she gets down there and sees Lucid, and it was pretty crazy.
This first episode, of course, it's kind of like what would you say it is? Just like a pre-party,
like a rehearsal dinner almost. Yeah,
rehearsal dinner almost. But it's like the rehearsal dinner is going to last 3 days because I think it's a 3-day event. I don't know why I was picturing this happening on a Friday night and it was going to go through Sunday as the wedding. That's what was in my brain. But it's interesting to see at this first dinner, she meets with Tay and she realizes something is not right. They, of course, met before season 1, and they were going to start a foundation that they could use to funnel money into the rebellion. But things are not going Tay's way right now because of the rebellion. It's causing his business to fail. He's getting drunk. Perrin, Mon Mothma's husband, points out that Tay was drunk and had to be taken home. He is going to quickly become a thorn in Mon Mothma's side instead of a boon in terms of the foundation.
And we see the reaction of Mon Mothma to this, her childhood friend Tay, and his wife has left him. He's getting drunk at these parties. He's complaining about Davos Golden, who is this wealthy and successful person, getting everything he wants. But Tay is struggling, and we see a difference between Mon Mothma and Luthen of how bad of an issue do they think this is going to be. Mon Mothma thinks, well, I'll be able to talk with him. He's an old friend. We'll be able to figure it out. And Luthen's not so confident on that.
She keeps talking about they're going to have this meeting. They're going to have this meeting in a few days. Once the wedding is over, they're going to meet together and find out what she needs to do to make this work. And Luthen does not seem optimistic. In fact, by the end of it, it is not said, but he basically says that he needs to do something. And Mon Mothma is just unaware. She just does not understand what he's saying, that he's going to have him killed because he's now a liability. I think it's interesting to show, just like in season 1, this isn't anything new, the dark side of the rebellion, where they have to make choices that will protect the interests of the rebellion. And at the end, we see a fun character, Cinta, come back. She was love interest of Vel, Mon Mothma's
cousin.
Who's
been present this whole time.
Who's been present this whole time. And she kind of comes in as an angel of death for Tay. And they don't show it on screen, but it's almost certain that he's going to...
Well, and Tay's imminent demise, Tay was one of the few people Mon thought she could be herself around. Like, she could talk about the rebellion with Tay. They were politically aligned and everything. The loss of Tay, parallel to what's happening with her daughter, leads to Mon Mothma's big crash out at the end of episode 3. And so kind of bringing it back to the wedding piece of this, Mon's daughter Leda, who's like 14, 15 years old, is getting married in an arranged marriage to Davos' son. And her daughter's really excited about this. You see her like giggling with her friends and like talking about her dress and everything. And you can see Maud's just very uncomfortable with the whole situation because she arranged this to get the money situated for the rebellion. And she's clearly like guilt-ridden about it. And then there's lots of scenes built around the lead up to the wedding. But we had 2 important scenes with Leda. One is where Leda is like crying because her fiance,
I think it's Leda.
Is it Leda?
Yeah,
it's Leda.
Leda.
Okay. Leda is crying because her fiance won't hold her hand. And it seems like a childish thing, but she's getting married to this guy the next day. He doesn't seem interested in her. And so Mon comforts her. And it's really one of the few times throughout the show that we've seen Mon be like maternal towards Leda at all. And then we get a parallel scene right before the wedding ceremony where Mon tells Lita that she's like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. This could be an act of bravery if you walked away. She said when I was getting married, my mom was drunk. I finally understand why she was. Lita says, I wish you were drunk. Like I'd rather you be drunk than what you're doing right now. Yeah, I've seen a lot of really viscerally negative reaction to Lita online for that. And Star Wars has a really warped perception of like the capability of teenagers, particularly teenage girls. Like if you look at Leia and Padme and Rey and Ahsoka, like these are like women that are leading armies, like being politicians and stuff. And Lita's like a normal teenage girl that's going to be a brat. And I think it's like we should have space for children to be children. But it just kind of shows like there's no coming back to this relationship. And Maud has pretty much sacrificed her family for the rebellion.
Yeah, I think we'll see her become more of a mother for the rebellion and step even further away from her family. We know that her relationship with Perrin is really strained. He accuses her of having an affair, which we think this is the third or fourth time that Mothma has been accused of having an affair. And so I think...
Or she's put it forth herself.
Yeah. I think we'll see... I think we'll see her continue to move away from her family, maybe even move away somewhat from Chandrilla and start to be more involved, more overseeing the rebellion instead of just funneling money, funneling help on the side. I think that will overlap with the Gorman massacre and everything. We know that ties into Rebels, but it'll be interesting. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the Mon Mothma storyline is the culture around the wedding. All of these different celebration pieces and these traditional pieces and everything was really, really interesting. I really love seeing different cultures in Star Wars, and it was really cool to see that wedding happen and the steps that they go through.
You know, this is, of course, the first on-screen appearance of Chandrilla, so everything got to be designed kind of from the ground up. It undoubtedly had a very Japanese feel to it. Mon Mothma's costumes are absolutely gorgeous, which they always are, of course, but they did a brilliant job. I love her bright orange wedding dress here.
Well, I think this is probably the most elaborate costuming we've seen probably since the prequels. Like the only thing comparable to me is Canto Bight and Last Jedi. Like this is definitely a massive, elaborate costume piece, which I'm really big fan of.
And there were so many characters too, right? It's a big wedding. There's a lot of people there, and yeah, there was a lot going on with the movements, the choreography of the wedding too. Them doing this kind of movement around this wedding couple and everything in a set pattern was also really, really cool to see this Chandrillan tradition. And then the one piece that I kind of was getting giddy about is the cutting off of the braid when Lita is getting married, which very much echoes Padawans cutting off their braid when they're being knighted. And it has to be a purposeful connection. They talk about the Rakatans invading 25,000 years ago and that the Jedi saved them. And it must be a tradition that has carried on because that's what the Jedi did. Or is it the other way? Did the Jedi adopt a Chandrillan custom and use that for their Padawans? I'll really, really curious if we get that Dawn of the Jedi movie, if we'll see some connector to that, because it feels very purposeful.
It was also just nice to get that braid off her head. I hated it this entire time.
Wasn't a great look, especially the mismatch. But speaking of the wedding, kind of like the finale for Mon Mothma is it's all built to a head of the tragedy of losing her daughter in a arranged marriage, and Tay going to be killed is the after party for the wedding. And we hear like it feels very like modern like wedding culture. I wouldn't have been surprised if they played Mr. Brightside later on screen. They're all dancing, and Lita's mother-in-law pulls Mon Mothma in for a shot, and Mon's like, why not? And Mon starts taking shots. It's like her life is just like spiraling, and she like gets it. She's spiraling. Yeah, she's like literally at the dance. Like the dance is very like hypnotic, the way that everybody's moving in like concentric circles and everything, and Mon's just crashing out because she feels like her life is falling apart, and Perrin realizes it. It's actually one of the few times we've seen Perrin be like somewhat like attuned to Mon Mothma's needs. Perrin's was interesting in these episodes. He had some good moments. I think most notably his speech at Lita's rehearsal dinner. He talks about the importance of like finding joy in lives. Like if you don't like look for joy, like the tragedies of life will like weigh you down. You'll never be able to get past it. And I think you could argue that Perrin has taken that to the extreme, that he like refuses to see tragedy around him. But I think it's actually a really important theme that like you see echoed throughout Star Wars. The first season of Andor is very dour. But there's not much joy to be had. And I think that you contrast it with A New Hope and Rebels and later Star Wars things, like those characters find joy in what they're fighting for. Rose says in Last Jedi, it's not about stopping what you hate, it's saving what you love. And it doesn't really feel like the rebellion's doing that right now. And I think that Mon hears that. I think that'll be something that we'll see as a theme throughout the season.
I also think it's a good parallel to the idea that Jin brings, that rebellions are built on hope, right? That you want to look up, you don't want to look down. This is kind of maybe Mon Mothma's lowest point, and we'll start to see her kind of look up and build hope and try and build this rebellion and bring it together as an alliance, not just these disparate groups on various planets doing their own thing, but something that is actually organized together. And so I think that's where we'll see her go in the rest of this season. 4 different storylines that, for the most part, the Cassian and the Mina Rao Ferric survivors group crosses over, but the Chandrilan part with Luthen and Mon Mothma and Dedra and Cyril on Coruscant mostly stays separate. And so I'm looking forward to the rest of the season as they are going to interweave their storylines, as they're going to be overlapping, coming into conflict with each other. Well, I'm kind of curious, what are your guys' thoughts? What do you think the next part of the season is going to be like?
I'm speculating that the next arc will probably be, we're in BBY4, as the beginning of the episode put it, which I thought was kind of interesting, instead of 4 BBY. I'm thinking the next one, we're probably going to jump a year or so every time. So we're looking at 3 BBY. I'm wondering if Cassian and Mon Mothma's arcs will finally intertwine. I think eventually that's what we're leading up to. I'm curious how the Imperial arc is going to factor into this. I'm not sure if we're expecting to see the Gorman Massacre this next arc, or it's probably going to be 2 BBY, which will probably be the third arc. It's 2 BBY.
I think it's going to be the third one.
Yeah. So we're still going to get to see some more planning. I'm sure the next arc we'll see some rebel activity on Gorman. I'm betting we'll probably see Gorman for the first time in this next arc, which is exciting because we never saw Gorman even in Legends. So it'll be nice to actually see it.
I'm also thinking we're going to get K2SO in arc 2. I think that's going to be when he comes in. They were using him a lot in a lot of like the marketing material, and I feel like they want to get their money's worth out of. Got to bring him back.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to have him back and see how much of their storyline is different from the Andor comic that we know about, and if it changes it, that's okay. But my guess after these first couple episodes is Dedra talking about how you have to influence. Is she's going to be trying to make Gorman a place that rebels want to go, that they're going to put out some sort of propaganda that makes the rebels think, oh, we have to attack this. So she's going to draw them to Gorman and influencing their decision to end up there and use their attack as a reason for the Empire to basically take over completely. What she was talking about with Orson Krennic is she's going to influence to draw the rebels in and basically make them attack Gorman first. And I'm curious how that's going to happen, if that is going to be the way it goes.
Yeah, I also think we're probably going to see probably some further fallout from Mothma. My guess, it would not shock me if she divorces Perrin to try to like insulate him. Like, as she's aware that like things are coming to a head, it would not surprise me if she does something to like try to protect Perrin so that she can leave more cleanly and he won't bear the brunt of her decision.
I haven't thought about it, but Andor was his first appearance ever.
Yeah, that was the first we ever heard.
Yeah. In all of the stories that come of her as Chancellor after the Empire and everything, he's never referenced. So I hadn't thought about that, but I bet you might be right there.
We'll have to wait and see. The next episode comes out on Tuesday, April 29th. So we will play the waiting game until then.
Yeah, and then you'll see us next week. We're going to break down all of the next 3 episodes each week. So you'll have weekly episodes from us. And then after that, we're going to switch back to our bi-weekly schedule.
All right. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yep. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us to talk about the galaxy far, far away. You can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok as Rogue3 Media. We look forward to talking with you at the next rendezvous point.